What if you were haunted by an evil entity and were about to die?
Rose Cotter, a simple psychiatrist living her life in New Jersey, has no idea what she's about to go through in the near future. In the first scene, she's shown at the mental asylum, taking care of a patient who is going through depressive psychosis. He claims that he, along with everyone else, is going to die. Everything seems easy. No problems arise at first. Then, she gets assigned to a new patient, Jessie. Jessie is a college girl who witnessed her professor unalive himself right in front of her. Now Rose is diagnosing her. Jessie says she sees people with these strange, unsettling smiles, cunning smiles that feel wrong and hard to explain. She believes she's going to die and keeps saying no one believes her. Rose, being a psychiatrist, believes it's a case of acute post-trauma psychosis. She concludes that witnessing her professor's tragic end was too overwhelming for Jessie, triggering her mental health crisis. In the next scene, Jessie is explaining her situation when she suddenly collapses. There's a sudden and disturbing shift in Jessie's demeanor. And before anyone can react, she acts out with a piece of broken vase, her unsettling smile still visible. Rose watches in shock and helplessness as the scene unfolds. Afterward, the police arrive to investigate. Two officers question Rose about Jessie's sudden death. Rose attributes it to paranoid delusions, but the officers dismiss it casually as though it were just another routine case. The covered body is shown with bloodstains that eerily resemble a smile, adding a disturbing element to the somber moment. In the next scene, Rose returns home, still deeply affected by the day's events. While changing clothes, she notices bloodstains on herself, symbolizing that the trauma has left marks not only on her clothing, but in her psyche. Later that evening, as she sips wine, she begins to hallucinate, seeing Jessie's unsettling smile. The intense moment is abruptly cut off when her fiancé, Trevor walks into the scene, startling Rose and causing her to drop her glass. This disruption highlights the increasing fragility of Rose's mental state. "Is there a problem?" Trevor inquires. "Nah, I'm fine," Rose replies, attempting to downplay her distress. In the next scene, Rose and Trevor are at a restaurant with Rose's sister and her husband, having a get-together. Rose, however, is gloomy and barely participating in the conversation, killing the vibe as always. Her sister asks, "Are you coming to the kid's birthday party this Saturday or not?" Rose, completely lost, responds,
Bro, what are you talking about, man? I'm out, man.
She firmly denies the invitation, claiming she has to work that day. Rose's sister, concerned, suggests that Rose should take more breaks from that hellhole of a place. Trevor jumps in to defend Rose, saying, "Work is her life, blah blah." But even I, as narrator, think this mental heroine needs a break from that hospital. She's going crazy from all the work stress. The conversation takes a small detour into an argument about Rose's old house, with her sister urging her to sell that dump, while Rose stubbornly refuses. The scene ends in tense silence. Rose, completely traumatized by the incident, still hasn't recovered. She remains gloomy at her job, barely holding herself together. The next day, one of the police officers returns to talk to Rose. It's revealed that he was her ex, adding a personal twist. The conversation is awkward and tense, but beneath the surface, there's something deeper. Rose begins to suspect that Jessie's death might be just the start of something much darker. Then, the unthinkable happens. While on the phone, she notices someone outside the window, smiling at her. The same uncanny, twisted smile. But she dismisses it, assuming it's just her mind playing tricks on her. As Rose walks through the hospital corridor, checking on her patients, she sees the man from earlier, the one with depressive psychosis. This time, he's smiling at her with that same eerie expression. Trying to remain professional, Rose approaches him with a gentle smile, asking about his health. Suddenly, the patient starts shouting, "You're gonna die," over and over, growing louder each time. Shocked and horrified, Rose calls for the ward boy to sedate the patient. He injects a sedative, calming him down. But then it's revealed that the entire interaction, the yelling, was just another hallucination. Rose makes excuses to her higher-ups, but given her obvious instability, she's put on a week's suspension, or more gently, paid leave. In the next scene, we see Rose out shopping for gifts for her nephew, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. Night falls, and Rose is home alone, as always, drinking wine. Suddenly, her home security system goes off, startling her. she receives a call from the security company. The officer on the other end informs her that the back door of her house is open. "Are you alone, ma'am?" the officer asks. "Yes, I'm alone," Rose responds, her voice shaky. "Are you sure, Rose? Are you really alone? Look behind." The officer presses, sending a chill down Rose's spine. Suddenly, the phone rings again, revealing that the previous call was just another hallucination. Rose, shaken, looks behind her, fear creeping in. She answers the phone again, and this time the officer says they are sending someone over to check the house. The cops arrive shortly after. In the next scene, we see the police talking to Rose, reassuring her that everything is fine. They explain it's likely a security alarm malfunction, nothing serious. At that moment, Trevor arrives, and Rose, still shaken, brushes it off as nothing. The scene shifts to Rose looking for her cat, trying to feed it, but the cat seems to be missing. Later that night, a nightmare from her childhood jolts Rose awake. Still haunted by Jesse's death, and desperate to understand what really happened, Rose decides to listen to the recording of the incident. As she plays the audio, a strange, unsettling sound repeats throughout the conversation. Confused and unsure of what she's hearing, she rewinds the recording multiple times, trying to decipher the noise. Suddenly, the sound becomes clear, a loud voice whispering Rose. At that exact moment, a shadowy figure appears beside her ear. Terrified, Rose grabs a knife, shouting in fear. Hearing the commotion, Trevor rushes in to help, but when he arrives, Rose, still panicked, points the knife at him defensively. Trevor is startled and scared, but Rose is just as frightened, her mind unraveling further. In the next scene, we see a woman walking. She is Rose's psychiatrist. Rose, scared for her life, approaches her for help. They sit and talk, with Rose explaining everything about her patient's incident and how it's mentally disturbing her. Desperate, Rose asks for a prescription for medication, directly hinting at the fact that she's also a doctor. However, the therapist reveals shocking information. Rose has a darker past, and this new trauma might just be a resurfacing of old wounds. Rose firmly denies this, refusing to talk about her past. The therapist advises her to stay away from work for a while and to socialize more to help clear her mind. Still traumatized and sleep-deprived after 2 days, Rose covers her dark circles with makeup. She attends her nephew's birthday party, but things take a horrifying turn when her gift is opened, revealing her dead cat inside. It's Mustache, the cat she owns. The sight shocks everyone, and now they all believe that Rose is mentally unstable. As Rose cries out in distress, seeing her beloved cat's dead body, she suddenly notices someone smiling at her from across the room. In a panic, she yells, "Why are you doing this to me?" The person quickly moves closer to Rose, startling her. She stumbles, falls onto a glass surface, and cries out in pain. Now in the hospital, Rose is more depressed and frightened, seeing the sinister smile everywhere. Trevor, shocked by what he heard from Rose's sister, drives her home in silence, unsure of how to deal with the situation. Rose, confused and overwhelmed, doesn't know how to explain things to him. Finally, she decides to tell Trevor everything. She believes she's cursed, and that an entity is following her, though only she can see it. Trevor, unable to accept the idea of the supernatural, refuses to believe her. He accuses Rose of killing Mustache and acting crazy before storming off, leaving her feeling more isolated than ever. Unable to sleep, Rose searches online for information and discovers that her patient had also witnessed a suicide before the haunting began. As she lies in bed, she hears a voice calling her name. Shivering, she pulls the blanket over herself, trying to sleep despite her fear. The next day, Rose visits Jesse's professor's house, where she speaks with his wife. Posing as a reporter to avoid alarming the woman, Rose starts asking questions. During the conversation, she realizes that this strange occurrence has happened before. It's part of a recurring pattern. When Rose confesses that the same thing is happening to her, the professor's wife becomes upset, accusing Rose of supporting her late husband's unhinged ideas. Rose, shaken by the confrontation, quickly leaves. Desperate for more answers, she seeks out her ex-boyfriend Joel, the police officer, hoping he can help her uncover the truth. Joel, surprised by Rose's sudden visit, tries to ask her questions, but Rose refuses to explain everything up front. She tells Joel she needs his help and asks that he trust her without pressing for details. Reluctantly, Joel agrees and helps Rose gather information from police records. As they go through the records, they notice a disturbing trend. Jesse, before her, her professor, and before him, another individual. All of them witnessed someone else's traumatic death before their own tragedies occurred. The details of the deaths are disturbing. Joel, unsettled by the chain of events, begins to wonder if there is something more sinister at play, potentially involving a larger conspiracy. Rose requests a hard copy of the information and rushes home, hoping to show it to Trevor and clear up the confusion. When Rose arrives home, she finds Trevor speaking with her therapist. Trevor had invited her over because he was worried about Rose's well-being. Rose is deeply hurt by Trevor's distrust. She had hoped he would understand her situation and stand by her, especially when she needed him most. But now, instead of supporting her, he's treating her as if she's mentally unwell and involving her therapist. The conversation is brief, but it ends in an argument that severely strains their relationship. Devastated by the turn of events, Rose seeks comfort from her sister. She arrives at her sister's house, only to be greeted by her brother-in-law, who hesitates to let her in. Eventually, Rose manages to speak with her sister. She shares the evidence she's gathered, but her sister, horrified by the photos, dismisses her, saying, "You're acting irrationally." The conversation quickly sours as her sister labels her unstable, claiming that Rose is struggling and needs help. Her sister then compares Rose to their mother, who had her own emotional and addiction issues. Angered, Rose snaps back. "How could you understand? You left me to deal with everything on my own." Now feeling utterly isolated, Rose is devastated. Her family doesn't believe her, and she's been labeled as unstable by everyone she knows. After a heated argument, Rose storms out of her sister's house in frustration. Sitting in her car, trying to gather her thoughts, Rose suddenly sees her sister approaching the car. But something is wrong. Her sister's body remains still, while her head tilts unnaturally and taps against the car window. Rose screams in terror, only to realize it's another hallucination. The scene cuts abruptly to Rose eating a burger and French fries, trying to regain a sense of normalcy. Just then, her phone rings. It's Joel. He tells her he's uncovered more information about the case and asks why she hadn't mentioned earlier that it was connected to her patient. Joel reveals that the chain of deaths stretches back to 20 victims, all but one of whom died, a man named Tally, an accountant. Tally survived by killing someone else, passing the curse to the witness. Rose sees a faint glimmer of hope. If she can break the chain, maybe she can survive. She insists that Joel arrange a meeting with Tally. In the next scene, Rose has already confided everything to Joel. While Joel doesn't believe in any supernatural elements, he's convinced that Rose is caught in something deeply troubling. Determined to help her, he arranges a visit to see Tally in prison. At the prison, when Rose and Joel finally meet Tally, Rose nervously jokes, "He doesn't look like a criminal." Joel brushes off her comment as they approach Tally, who is clearly shaken. Rose introduces herself as a doctor and explains that she's trying to help her patient, who is facing the same experiences Tally went through. She pleads for his help. Tally, visibly exhausted, explains that he doesn't fully understand the entity, but knows it started in Brazil years ago. He describes it as a curse passed from one person to the next through traumatic deaths. He recounts how one man escaped the curse by taking someone's life, thus transferring the burden to a new witness. Tally tells Rose that if she wants to survive, she would need to kill someone to continue the cycle. Rose, horrified, responds, "I could never do that." Realizing that Rose carries the same curse, Tally panics, blaming her for bringing it back to him. In a moment of fear and anger, he slams his hands on the table, startling everyone with his outburst. As they leave the prison, Joel confronts Rose, asking what really happened in the conversation. Rose, still shaken, downplays it, saying that Tally didn't provide anything helpful. Sensing her discomfort, Joel decides not to press her further. Back at home, Rose is alone when her therapist unexpectedly arrives. Rose had been searching for some clues before the therapist showed up. The therapist sits with her, apologizing for the events with Trevor the previous day. She explains that Trevor wasn't wrong for being concerned, and Rose reassures her that she's been struggling with her patient's case, but is working to recover. They talk for a while, but then the phone rings. The therapist urges Rose to take the call. As Rose answers, she hears her therapist's voice on the other end, apologizing for the previous day. Shocked, Rose realizes that the person sitting in front of her is not her real therapist. It's the entity, wearing an unsettling, unnatural smile. Terrified, Rose tries to run, but stumbles. Desperate, she begs the entity to tell her what it wants. The entity, with a chilling grin, replies, "Not long before you meet your fate." The next scene shows Rose standing outside a mental health facility, holding a concealed object. It's clear she's planning something. She enters the building, pretending to retrieve some belongings as she's still on leave. Rose makes her way to the MDD patient, the same one who had been repeating ominous warnings. Sensing something off, the patient begins to panic. At that moment, Rose's senior colleague arrives and, noticing her agitation, advises her that she shouldn't be there. Suddenly, Rose experiences another vivid hallucination. She imagines attacking the patient, but as the scene unfolds, the patient laughs hysterically, and her senior's appearance distorts as he begins to peel off his skin. Just before Rose's mind breaks completely, she snaps back to reality. Her senior, alarmed, notices her distress and asks what she's doing there, spotting something in her car. He tries to intervene, but Rose flees, saying she has found the solution. Rose calls Joel and tells him the only way to stop the entity is to isolate yourself. It thrives on trauma. Joel disagrees, warning her that living in isolation isn't the answer, but Rose cuts him off. Determined to end the curse, she heads to her childhood home, a remote, dilapidated house in the middle of nowhere. It's the perfect place for her to confront the entity and put an end to the nightmare. Rose prepares to stay there, gathering torches and lanterns for light. As she explores the house, she opens the door to her mother's old room. A flashback reveals a haunting memory. Rose's mother overdosed, begged 10-year-old Rose to call for help. But out of fear, Rose refused, and her mother died. In the present, Rose's mother appears before her, accusing Rose of abandoning her in her final moments. Rose, filled with guilt but defiant, says, "You were a monster, and I was just a child. I couldn't do anything." She insists that her mother isn't real, and that everything she's seeing is just in her mind. The entity, however, taunts her, saying, "Your mind makes it real." A fierce struggle ensues between Rose and the entity. In the end, Rose grabs a lantern and burns the entity to ashes, setting the entire house on fire in the process. The flames symbolize Rose's release from her traumatic past, as she literally and figuratively burns away her demons. In the final scene, Rose, convinced she's escaped the curse, arrives at Joel's apartment. Exhausted and visibly drained, she confesses that she hasn't slept in days and seeks solace from someone she trusts. She apologizes for distancing herself in the past, admitting he was too good for her, and at that time, she wasn't ready to let down her emotional walls. Joel responds with a warm smile, and the scene feels hopeful as Rose seems to find some peace. He gently reassures her, saying, "I'll always be here for you." But as Rose looks closer at Joel, a sense of dread washes over her. His face begins to contort into the same eerie, unnatural smile that has haunted her. Terrified, she rushes toward the door, desperate to escape, but when she opens it, she finds herself back in front of her old, decaying childhood home. Nothing was real. The entire encounter was a figment of her imagination. The house stands untouched, along with the entity and all the trauma she has tried to flee. Realizing she remains trapped in her own mind, Rose begins to unravel. At that moment, Joel arrives in reality. Worried after their previous call, he has traced her location. Seeing Joel approach sends Rose into a panic, and she feels certain her fate is sealed. She rushes back into the house, locking the door behind her. Inside, the entity is waiting, ready to consume her entirely. As Rose's mind spirals, she struggles to hold on, but it's too late. The entity takes full control. Joel finally breaks down the door, only to find Rose standing before him, wearing that same grotesque, unsettling smile. Before he can react, she douses herself in gasoline, grinning at him as she strikes a match. Joel watches in helpless horror as Rose ignites, her eyes locked onto his, the smile fixed on her face. The film concludes with Joel's devastated expression, witnessing his beloved Rose consumed by flames. The camera lingers on his haunted eyes as he stands in the doorway, powerless to save her or escape the nightmare in which she is trapped.